Alright, welcome back, and this one's going to be interesting because this one's another thing you're probably going to use a lot in Java, and that is for loops. Now, let's just demonstrate. So for, this is how you write a for loop. For, and then we put the body, so it's kind of almost like you're doing an if statement. You know, it's kind of similar to that. And what you usually do is you go in I, it doesn't have to be I, but usually people use I, equals 0, so we create a variable, and then what we do is we put I here, so you could almost think of this as if everything that's happening in here is kind of like a bunch of different lines of code. That's why we have these semicolons to divide, because it's almost like you know, these are all distinguishable things, which they are. But yeah, that's the way to think about it. But you have int I equals 0, and then what you have is I is less than, right? Usually you do this, where I is less than a number. And this is the number of times you want the for loop to repeat itself. And then once it has reach this number, so once I is no longer less than whatever this number is, let's say 6, then it will stop. Now of course we also need I to be going up every single time it repeats itself. So in this case we simply just go here and we go I plus plus, and plus plus is just another way of saying I plus 1. But usually you put plus plus because that's kind of, that's how, well basically it's not just I plus 1, but it's also, it's I plus I, it's basically I is equal to I plus 1. That's what it's trying to say. But yeah, you know what I mean. This is the same as saying I equals I plus 1. That's basically what I'm trying to say. But yeah, that's pretty much how you do it. So this is going to repeat whatever we put in here 6 times. So let's put a bunch of prints, because this is probably the simplest way of demonstrating what it can do. So let's say, let's print out O, or something like that, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there you go. Now you're probably thinking, oh, but if it's less than 6, but that's because it starts at 0, remember? So it will account for when I is 0, it will account for when I is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, which all of that adds up to 6 because we're including 0. So yeah, that's how it's set up. So pretty simple, and the cool thing is that you can use this to display the contents of an array. So remember before I showed arrays, you could create one. So let's say we created a string array. So we do that, and then we said, yet again, we'll just do names, and then we'll make it equal to a bunch of different names. Hank, Cornelius. I don't use capital letters because I don't feel like it. And John. H. So we have all of that, and what we can actually do is we can go obviously system dot out dot print line, and then what we can do is we can print out the values of this. So, and it just saves having to manually print them all out. So in this case, obviously, it's going to be the length of this thing, and I'm going to show you how you do that. In order to make sure it's the same length as the actual array, we simply go names dot and then length, right? And then that way it'll make sure that it is the length that matches this, and especially when you have a really long array, you don't want to have to count it by hand. So names dot length, And now we are going to print out, and we're going to print out names, and then we, like we did before, we put the square brackets, and then we can go I. And what this means is that, as we can see, I is a integer that is increasing, and then, you know, we can see it's increasing here, and then as long as it's less than names.length, it's going to increase. So the value of I, as it's changing, will give us different values as it's printed out. So say you have names, and then in this case it's 0, right? In the beginning it's 0, so we're going to print out Hank, right? Because remember, it starts at 0 instead of 1. And then the next one's going to be 1, which is going to be Cornelius, and then the next one's going to be 2, which is Jonah, and eventually it'll approach the length, which it'll then stop. So with that in mind, let's see what the result is. I think it's better just to show it. So there you go. It prints out Hank, and then the next line it prints out Cornelius, then it prints out Jonah H. So that is pretty much for loops for ya. Hope you like that one. And yet again, I keep this person class up here because you could easily print out a bunch of people, but I think I'm just going to keep it simple and just show you. You know, no, I'm actually going to show you how to do this because I think this is a cool thing you can do as well. So let's change this from a string array to a person array, an array that keeps a bunch of people. We'll call it people, and down here we'll also do people, right? Now also change this to people as well. Now obviously we can't really do this. In this case we have to create a new person, and then we just have to put in their name, so John, and then just to make things easier, let's simply just copy and paste John a few times, but let's just say this guy's name is not John and it's Jerry with a G, and 2 Y's apparently. And let's also give this guy Stevenov because he's from Russia. So basically we have John, you know, Jerry, all that kind of stuff, so 3 names. And so we wanted to print out people I. Well, this is not going to work because we have to print out the names, so we could go dot name like that. But there's another thing we could do that might even be simpler than this. What if, I know we could do that and it would work, right? I just want to prove that that will work too. But another way we can do this, and this incorporates using methods in conjunction with for loops. If we were to add a public void display name, let's say, and yet again, any name you want, don't be scared, display name, and then we would put system, I always make that mistake, I don't know why, dot out dot print line, and then we would have put name into there. Then instead of having to have a system dot out here, we could literally just go people, and then put the index there. That's what it's called, an index, by the way. And instead of name, which isn't really going to do anything, what we'll do is we go display name. And there you go, it gives us the same thing. So that is an example of what you would most likely do in that situation. You'd have something to display the name, and that way, you know, the for loop's a little bit cleaner. So there you go. That is pretty much all we need to know for now. There's other aspects that come into for loops, but I think we'll talk about that another time. This is really the essentials, and a lot of these other things, as long as you know the essentials, you can kind of learn them as you go.